A return to the roots of Africa. Off the coast of Guinea-Bissau, the Africa Queen is heading for forgotten islands, hidden villages, animist rites, dazzling white beaches. At the dawn of the 21st century, the Bijagos Islands are still waiting to be discovered. Rocked by the movement of the Atlantic Ocean, this boat will take us on a surprising voyage, far, far from our own ways of thinking. Bissau, the capital of Guinea-Bissau, a country the size of Switzerland with a population of 1.5 million. A small, spunky country that put up 11 years of resistance to finally win its independence from Portugal in 1974. This blind musician is well known around the port. He's a Bijago, a native of the group of islands we'll be visiting off the coast. The tone of his voice, the rhythm of his music, and his creativity all reflect the soul of his ethnic group, the Bijagos. A handful of Guineans living on a remote, little-known archipelago of 88 islands that is still untouched by modern consumer society. In the port of Bissau, there are several boats getting ready. The Bijagos Express heads out every Friday afternoon, according to the tide. It's the only regular link between the capital and Boubaké, the main island of the Bijagos. The trip takes about 4 hours and the boat arrives after nightfall. A stone's throw away, the Africa Queen is waiting till it's time to weigh anchor. This worthy corvette is almost 60 years old and she's getting spruced up to receive the passengers from Europe, travelers eager for a taste of African adventure. The boat has a one-day layover in the port of Bissau between trips. This is when Usman, the cook on the Africa Queen, does his shopping. He has to buy supplies for a whole week of meals on board. Local produce to be served up with a wide variety of fresh-caught fish. Jackfish, dorade, snapper, barracuda, all to be served up with Usman's personal touch.
I do skewers, fillets, breaded fish, breaded cutlets, meat, chicken skewers, everything, ratatouille, everything that's good, purees, a lot of thieboudienne, Senegalese thieboudienne, with chicken and lime.
Guinea-Bissau gets a good amount of rain, and a wide variety of crops grow there. But the only export produce are cashew nuts and palm oil. Now, after years of exploitation by self-serving leaders, The country, somewhat forgotten by the international community, is struggling to get back on its feet. The Bissau Guineans are largely animists, and in the more remote regions, the ancestral beliefs and traditions are still deeply rooted. In this district of the capital, the youngsters are rehearsing for Carnival, which will take place in a month. This evening, the passengers will get to know their boat, the Africa Queen. And tomorrow at daybreak, they'll awaken to a new world. The Africa Queen leaves the port of Bissau, and after a night at sea, drops anchor off the eastern coast of the island of Cagnabac.
The African Queen flies the Guinean flag, but the crew is 90% Senegalese. Maybe that's because Bissau has no major school to train seamen. So most of the professionals are from Senegal or Ghana, where there's an important maritime academy, or they're from Morocco, from Tunisia. They still don't have a maritime academy school here in Guinea-Bissau. You really have to know the zone on account of all the sandbanks you see here on the chart. There are sandbanks all over and rocks, so it takes a lot of concentration, and you really have to be careful, very careful, and get to know the area. Experience really helps.
Even though the Bijagos lie on a busy sea route and are quite close to the mainland, they have remained unspoiled. Of the 88 islands, only about 20 are inhabited. In addition to the problems of navigation, there are also the torrential rains that batter the islands every day during their winter season, from April to September. In 2008, the UNESCO took up the case of this unspoiled realm and designated the islands a World Biosphere Reserve.
Every time we approach a village, I have the visitors wait while I go ahead and let the villagers know that they're about to have a visit, so that they're not taken by surprise. Then I come back and get the tourists, and we all enter the village together. It's like when you visit someone's home, you say hello. This way, they know what to expect, so they're in a receptive mood.
Diédiou has been working on the Africa Queen for 20 years. Over time, he has become the boat's ambassador to the Bijagos. He never comes empty-handed. The villagers are always grateful for his gifts, especially fish and medicine.
This is the center of the village. And here you have the empty gas cylinder. It's a gong like a telephone. If you have a party or a ceremony, they have their rules. So every village in Cagnabac has its empty gas cylinder.
Here on the island of Canyabac, the passengers are about to make their first encounter with the Bijagos villagers. Their first impression is that of a normal African village. It takes an experienced eye and a keen sense of observation to see that the Bijagos society has very strict codes that it's important to respect.
We have to wait for permission. First, you have to ask for permission, our entry visa. I'm not sure, so we'll wait for Nico to get here. Otherwise, we may run into problems. We can't just go barging in.
Trees are the pillars of Bijagos society. The Bijagos always build their villages in the shade of the kapok trees away from the beaches. They plant their rice paddies beneath the palm trees. They build their houses from leaves and branches. They live in these temporary dwellings while they cultivate their crops on the sacred islands. If you look carefully, you'll notice a jungle gym for the children, a doghouse, and in the crown of the palm trees, bottles of palm sap. They'll ferment this sap to make palm wine that the men get together to drink in a special men's lodge set up outside the village.
This is the drinking horn for the wine.
These woven leaves are like signposts in the forest, and if you can't read them, you could very well get into trouble. As for the social structure, it is very tightly organized. Every member has their exact position, and it's been like that since the dawn of time.
In a Bijago family, the house belongs to the woman, and she even designs her own house. With the help of her friends, and the woman goes and gathers the straw for the roof. Here in the Bijagos, it's the woman who chooses her husband. There are 7 to 10 children in a family, so the father changes. He moves on, but the children stay with the mother. The separation takes place when the man is initiated. Everyone knows he's going to leave his wife. That's how it's done. When they tell the man, next year you go off for the initiation, the woman already has another husband in view for when the men enter the initiation period. They have to leave the village. They go live in the forest for about 7 months, and during that time, they're not allowed to address women directly.
Once permission has been granted, we can ask all the questions we want. Well, almost all.
These are the leaves she gathered in the forest. Now she'll dip her skirt in it to dye it. There's black and brown. This is black. I asked her to show me the leaves she uses for the dye, but she refused because it's secret. She doesn't want me to know her secret.
With or without the visitors, life in the village goes on as normal. Each villager goes about their business. Just a group of laughing children tag along with the strangers. The meeting of the two cultures often makes for misunderstandings, for the Europeans know nothing about the Bijagos way of life, and the villagers likewise have no more than a vague idea of what Europe is like.
Bonjour. Ça va? Très bien.
They're not like us. They don't know how to climb a palm tree. They come by boat, and they usually ask us to dance for them so they can take pictures. They even asked me to go climb a palm tree to harvest the palm wine. I did it, but my wife with her child on her back gave me a funny look. We're not used to that kind of thing here in Canyabac. All I know is that they eat well. I don't know what they eat, but I'm sure they eat well.
For ages, the mainlanders lived in fear of the Bijagos islanders. They would surge out from the sea like Vikings in their pirogues with a bull's head on the bow and pillage the coasts. Even the European navigators in their imposing sailing ships were not spared. But colonization put an end to their maritime expeditions. The Bijagos now only have small, inoffensive pirogues. With their weekly incursions into the Bijagos territory, which is now a UNESCO natural reserve, the tour operators realize that they are treading sensitive ground. The biodiversity of this archipelago is unmatched on the entire African coast. The marine fauna counts over 155 species of fish. The beaches of this rich biotope are also home to 5 of the world's 8 species of sea turtle.
Wouldn't like to be a boat skipper in these waters. We saw them sailing in less than 1 meter of water, nearly skimming a rock right at the surface.
Il y a un poisson. Tac, je l'ai. La première dorade. Ouais, beau ça. Le fond, ouais, moi j'ai le fond par contre. Ah bordel. Débauché. Fais voir, fais voir, fais voir. Oh, un beau. C'est quand même pas vrai. Ah si.
It's just magic when it comes out of the water.
Qu'est-ce qu'on vient, on a pris d'autre? On a pris la dorade rose.
Right now we're catching some pink dorade.
Donc ça c'est pour les petits poissons.
Grouper, those are the smaller fish. Then we got bonito, barracuda, red snapper, jackfish. I'm bringing one in now. And he just got off the hook. We caught some giant needlefish. We even got one that weighed 5 kilos. There's no comparison with fishing in Europe. Then some shark. That's a more specialized type of fishing.
Catching a barracuda, that's pretty good.
This is one of the best catches we've ever had.
Parce que c'est des pêches complètement différentes. Elle était là. Oui, ben c'est raté.
Usman cooks up the daily catch and serves it on board. There's also a part reserved for the villages that the travelers visit. And when the catch is really good, they store it for the coming weeks.
You see the big barracuda we caught? This is a guinea jack, this is a Senegal jack.
La barracuda. Mais d'habitude,
Usually, when we have fishermen on board, they want to eat the fish they caught. Sometimes we have the dinner ready and then they come along and they want to eat their fish. We caught this barracuda or this snapper. We'd like to eat it. They like that. It's better when we're ashore. They sell fish, there's a butcher, a pastry shop, all the supplies. We can get hot meals. Here on board, we have to make our own pastry. We have to cook the hot meals. We have to clean up and do the dishes. We have to do everything on board. But you get the experience. It's good for you.
Les Portugais, quand ils sont arrivés pour coloniser, ils ont dû venir par la mer. D'ailleurs, à mon avis, ils ont dû en perdre des bateaux.
Like elsewhere in the region, rice is a staple food in the Bijagos Islands. They grow it in a very well-kept forest. It's the men's job to clear the ground. Then the women and children do the planting, tend the shoots, and come up with clever ways to scare the birds off. Right near the rice fields, they set up a village of temporary huts. They stay a few months working their crops. Then after the harvest and threshing, the villagers will all head back to their permanent dwellings, which are usually on another island. But rice is not enough. They have to complete their diet by hunting and gathering.
In addition to rice, we eat roots, wild manioc. We find it in the forest and make flour from it. We also gather berries that grow near the shore, and we eat palm nuts. This rice here is not enough for the whole family because there are so many of us. They gave us 2 plots of land to work, but we didn't get enough rain this year. The harvest isn't good. It won't be enough.
It's back home after the harvest. All the generations pile in to return to their permanent village before the rainy season. But this is not their traditional pirogue. It was lent to them by the hotel so that they could make the crossing more quickly and keep the rice from getting wet. A concrete example of the indispensable solidarity that exists between the ancestral property owners and the new settlers. The Africa Queen has been coming to these islands for 2 decades and has always practiced a system of exchange with the villagers. No money ever changes hands between the boat and the villagers, but each party is duty-bound to be generous.
These totems you see here are all gifts. Each village of Kanyabak gave us a totem, and these totems are all sorcerers. They protect the boat, and all of us who work on board as well.
The magic of the totems has done a good job protecting this boat, for it came out of a French shipyard in 1952. The conscientious and caring crew keep the Africa Queen perfectly shipshape, so even now it doggedly continues sailing under the power of its 2 original diesel engines.
You know, there are things you have to preserve for future generations. This is a beautiful piece of machinery that has lasted, so that means it is one fine hunk of hardware. The factories have closed, but there is always someone who manages to dig up the parts we need to keep the motor running smoothly.
In the Bijagos, every moment of life is decided by the spirits, and in order to speak with them, one has to make the appropriate offerings. In most of the ceremonies, it's the Omo Grande who call upon the spirits with a display of vehemence.
Todo mundo mo kaya
These men have made it through the initiation. When they were 27, they left their wives and families to go off to the sacred forest for several years. On the island of Kanyabac, the rite lasts 7 years, a record compared to the usual practices in Africa. When they come back to society, with the prestigious title of Homo Grande, they can take another wife. They are considered wise men, and they intercede with the spirits in most of the Bijagos ceremonies. Here, the chicken serves as a messenger. The way it runs around when its head is cut off and the color of the entrails are all so many answers to the enigmas of life. They say that the spiritual powers of the Bijagos are very strong and that many politicians come to consult them.
People come from the world over to ask favors of the spirits. First they come to make their requests, then they come back to thank the gods. We even had people come from America.
The same rules apply to this luxury hotel set up on the sacred island of Ruban. The ancestors approved the construction, and the traditional Bijagos rules about sharing are part of the everyday routine. No walls, no fences. The spirits have to be able to protect and ensure the prosperity of the establishment through the intermediary of the Homo Grande.
Bo, no torna jana kusala, no torna jana. Na onde que sinta banel. No le vale para fazer um trabalho. Pronto. Gosi. Para falar para sinta, tranquilo.
The ceremony is a necessary part of life here. It's part of our upbringing. We have to carry on doing everything that our ancestors did. It's like our school. If you fail, you remain ignorant. When the initiates speak, you can't stay with them. You're not allowed to listen to their conversation, even if you have a job for some time off for the ceremony. Then you go back to work. You have to. You always have to go to the ceremonies here.
In Ponta Anchaca, many of the employees come from the Bijagos Islands. They were trained by the hoteliers and very quickly adapted to the demands of hotel work. Their presence is also a link with the village that sold the land to the hotel. For outsiders who settle here, always have to bring something positive to the community. In the past, before the first hotels and encampments were set up, the outsiders that visited the Bijagos were mainly fishermen, and shark fishermen in particular. The fish-laden waters were and still are quite tempting for the nearby Senegalese and Guinean fishermen. To settle on the islands, one has to be able to adapt and to offer the islanders something they don't have. Aliasila comes from Guinea-Conakry, former French Guinea. He's a fisherman, and like many before him, he came to try his luck in this zone that is specifically protected from the big factory trawlers. Alia has been accepted here in the Bijagos mainly thanks to his wife, Kadi. She is a healer, a gift she inherited from her mother. Since she arrived in the Bijagos Islands with her husband, the bench outside their hut is always crowded with villagers waiting to consult her. This old man has been practically crippled with pain for several weeks. But what's worrying him is that his brother, who lives on another island, is suffering from the same symptoms. He's come to consult for the two, for he suspects that rather than a real illness, there are some mystical forces at work. Kadi casts the cowrie shells and then starts to read them. She speaks Nalu, a very rare language. Her husband translates into Portuguese Creole, but the patient speaks only Bijagos. So they need a fourth person to complete the communication. In most of the islands, money isn't used. So as payment, the villagers give Kadi poultry, goats, or sacks of rice. Kadi and her husband have now been fully assimilated into Bijagos society. They are useful to the community.
This old gentleman has just come from the hospital in Bubake. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. So he came to see us. By the grace of God, we can take care of everyone, even people that couldn't be cured at the hospital in Bissau. We heal young and old, people of all ages, even the most complicated cases. I had to build extra huts to house everyone. Do we go back? Do we stay? It's God who decides in the end. For the time being, we're in good health, so that means we stay. Once, I wanted to go back to my home, but the people here asked me to stay. The Bijagos function on the basis of exchange. If you want to stay, you have to show them that you have something to offer them.
The southernmost port of call of our cruise on the Africa Queen is the island of João Vieira, a sacred island reserved for growing crops, but where they've allowed an encampment to be set up. Claude was a shark fisherman before the Bijagos Natural Park declared sharks a protected species. He came here with his wife and family from Casamance in Senegal to start a new life. His wife Marie knows the king of Menek, and he's invited her to a ceremony. The family has been taking part in the everyday life of the village for several years now. They ship merchandise to Bissau, do medical transportation, and other odd jobs. It's the tribute they pay for being allowed to live a quiet life here.
They need help. They manage pretty well on their own, but they still need help. Especially when it comes to health and hygiene, they need help.
They're fervent believers. They do a lot of ceremonies. They spend a third of their time on ceremonies. They believe in their God, and they're really inscrutable. They're not complicated. You have to respect them. It's their law, their rules, and not just anyone can come and settle here. It's complicated. You have to prove your goodwill. You can't misbehave. If you step out of line, they'll send you packing right away. They're very, very conservative. They're not great hunters or great fishermen. They live and survive completely on their own. It's a different world here. You can't compare them with the Maasai, or the Moroni, or the Amazonian Indians, but the tribes here live in remote regions and have nothing to do with the government of Guinea-Bissau. It's a characteristic of the Bissau. Very special.
Do they have spiny lobsters here? Because they do in Senegal, lots of them. Catch anything? Was it good? Better than yesterday?
We got 4 barracuda, a jackfish, some bonito. Pretty good.
Voilà. Quand tu débarques comme ça dans une île, les jeunes surtout.
The people here are not used to seeing tourists land on their islands, especially the younger ones. So they might behave a little strangely, but it's just out of curiosity. They'll come up to the tourists and want to touch them. I even saw little Bijago lift up a young French girl's dress to see what was underneath, but it's really just curiosity. So you talk to the islanders. You tell them, they're like you. They're white, but they're like you. The tourists, on the other hand, sometimes you tell them how things are here. They say, no, it's not possible. And when they come, they're surprised. They think, why didn't I bring such and such a thing? They really need that. But you have to explain to them that these people don't need all that. If you give them money, what are they going to do with it? We mustn't create needs. If you create wants and needs, it just means problems for them later on.
Amy wears 3 hats on the Africa Queen: chambermaid in the morning, bartender in the evening, and when they stop over on an island at lunchtime, she gets out her first aid certificate and her nurse's uniform.
Last Sunday, I noticed this boy, but I didn't have my kit with me then, so I couldn't take care of him. But today, I'm going to dress his wound. If it's not me, it has to be the captain or the commanding officer. Only the captain, the commanding officer, or myself are authorized to dispense medicine.
I don't think these people have such a hard life. They've been living like this since they were born. We could never live this way. Never. There's no way. Especially for me. I couldn't stay out in the bush, even a single day. I really feel for these people. Of course, they're used to their way of life. And you can't compare life here with a rich country with lots of money. Here, they don't have any money. But they manage to go on living their lives just the same.
In addition to the navigation, the regular work hours, the excursions, the crew of the Africa Queen also exercise their talents as fishermen, always respecting the regulations of the natural park.
Ah, c'est des pros, hein? Ils ont grandi là-bas, ils ont grandi dans l'eau. Quand on en prend plein, on donne.
When we have a good catch, we give some to the villagers who live on the island. On each island where we catch mullet. But we do this mainly to catch bait fish. We can't use frozen bait. It would really be a shame to come here and fish with frozen bait when you can catch it so easily right here on the spot.
De nos résidences principales pour se faire.
On land and sea, the conventions are respected to the letter. In the time-honored tradition of cruises, there's an unavoidable event, a veritable maritime ritual, the captain's evening. The crew is always ready to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty, so to speak. These men were born in the mangrove swamp, so they're used to gathering oysters from the roots. But even they are impressed by the hard life that the Bijagos lead. There are no connections between the islands, just one hospital for the entire archipelago. There are few schools and poor attendance. Even in the most remote communities of mainland Africa, the way of life has evolved. The ecological equilibrium the Bijagos have maintained since the dawn of time is of course quite topical now, but it still is subject to the outside world that comes knocking at its door more and more often.
The world doesn't stop turning. People migrate, and colonization is a thing of the past. We live in a time of globalization, so even if we don't want to, we have to accept it to keep up with the evolution of the world. These people need hospitals, schools. They've said that they want schools and medical assistance. That's why they have to do a trade-off. They give up something to get something. In this day and age, you can't live the way we lived 100 years ago. It's not possible.
If you're young in the Bijagos, it means you're strong. You've lived through the severe rainy seasons and childhood diseases. Thanks to their masks and dances, these girls will get to see Bissau, the capital, when they participate in the annual carnival competition, where the Bijagos are always a big hit. For the most part, the young Bijagos live their everyday life in the forest. They don't often get the chance to ride the boat to the main island, Boubaké, where the local government and shops are concentrated. The town boasts a cyber cafe and a discotheque, open to those with hard cash, for barter is no longer accepted here. Fidel has done his very best to continue his education, but he doesn't forget the traditional costume when the occasion calls for it. The tug-of-war between the traditional and the modern started very early for this native son of Boubaké.
You really have to be strong-willed to go to school. Otherwise, it just won't happen. You can't count on encouragement from your family. Just the opposite. They want you to come work, to learn how to harvest palm wine and palm oil, to learn how to fish and grow rice, instead of going to school. Because nowadays, if you go to school, what will you have to eat if you didn't do any work? So it's really an uphill battle.
Come on in.
When the passengers visit the schools, they often give the teacher a gift of school supplies for the children.
Now he's going to give a few little tests to see who does the best, because there's not enough material for everybody. It's a way of motivating them. So he'll give tests and choose the first 10.
Education in the Bijagos really takes place out in the sacred forest, not in the classroom. How to climb a palm tree, how to cast a net, how to guide a pirogue through the mangrove swamp. These are all skills necessary for survival on these islands. Growing up without becoming a Homo Grande is simply unthinkable. The king of this village died recently. Now they have to pick his successor from among the Homo Grande. But in the Bijagos, the status of king is more an ordeal than an honor. For if the king is not up to the task, his days are numbered.
The king is dead. They have to choose a new king. It's the women who choose the king. The women come and they touch you. You're now king. The men are afraid to be named king because it means leaving your family. And it's hard living on your own. So they try to go off and hide. Being named king means a lot of responsibility. The problem is they sometimes die after 2 or 3 years. So everyone's afraid.
They're preparing for a ceremony here in the village of Bijante, and everyone is invited. It's a village ceremony that often takes place at the beginning and end of each harvest, and every time the village is facing an important decision. A hut made of woven palm fronds stands behind the 3 irrans, the wooden idols that symbolize each sector of the village. Each person's place is strictly set by his or her importance. Mangor Kono was recently chosen as the new king of Bijante. Even though he's quite young, he has already been initiated and has a rightful claim to the title of Omo Grande. The king is very attentive to the strict observance of the protocol. In his presence, the ritual must take place without the slightest error of gesture, word, or order. The king is convinced that if the spirits are not happy, he's the one who will have to pay the price. He still recalls his recent designation.
It was July 22nd, around 8 in the evening. It was night. They took me, and I couldn't say anything. When they grab you, they take you off to a sacred place. And there, you just have to submit, because you don't know what is going to happen to you. You have to keep quiet. It's a decision taken by the village. It's not my will. It's not like in other countries.
A sacrifice takes place at each ceremony. The more important the request, the bigger the animal. The blood and entrails feed the communication with the spirits of nature. The ceremony is the occasion to speak out. In the presence of the whole village and under the authority of the king, each person can voice his or her opinion. Today, the sacrifice was requested by an outsider. She stays apart, outside the circle of initiates. The discussion is all about her presence on the island and her request for permission to promote tourism in the Bijagos. If the Hotel Anchaco wants to add an extra bungalow, the question must be put to the spirits. Once again, it's the chicken that has the final word in all these questions.
These are two totally opposite worlds. Even I, who am Europeanized, I've seen through them that I'm not truly an African. I'm African by my skin. I'm African because I was born in Africa, but I don't have the African culture. This culture that I learned about through visiting the Bijagos, who live as maybe my grandparents lived. The ones who are right. They have no needs. They don't know the market. They don't care about electricity, bills, bicycles. They live naturally, from hunting and gathering. Sometimes people think that they're unhappy, but I find that they're very happy in their environment. I think they're right.